fire drew a bright orange line across my lawn, like the night decided to underline my front door. Diane Whitaker, our HOA president with the perfect hair and the clipboard voice, stood across the street with a red gas can and a cheap lighter. And I stood barefoot on my porch, holding a garden hose and telling myself not to blink, because if I did, my dog scout and my house would be gone. Yeah, that happened. I cracked the spigot. The hose kicked in my hand, and while the flame hissed along the gasoline like a fuse, I kept saying in my head, "This is my home, not hers, not the association's, not anybody's private kingdom dressed up as community." You know what I mean. That's the night it all snapped into focus. But the slow burn started 6 months earlier, when I moved onto Maple Hollow Drive in Willow Bend. Small 2-story, with a white porch, and just enough yard to feel like mine. The realtor had told me my parcel, Lot 12B, sat outside Maple Hollow Estates HOA, which sounded like music because I wasn't looking for a committee to pick my paint color. I wanted quiet and coffee, and the dog I didn't have yet, but somehow already missed. Day 3. Diane arrived in a blue blazer and low-heel smile, bright enough to fog glass clipboard, tucked to her hip like a holster. "Welcome, I'm Diane, president of the association. I like to meet new residents and make sure we're aligned on standards." Standards, not hello. "Not nice to meet you." I told her what the deed said, and she gave me that practiced little laugh. "Everything on this cul-de-sac is under our care. I'll drop off your dues form." She was already pivoting as she said it. Perfume and rules trailing behind her. For a couple of weeks, I pretended it wouldn't matter. I painted the porch, tightened a hinge, and found Scout wandering into my yard like he'd always lived there. He stayed. I named him. And then the paper cuts began. Pink slip on the mat saying "grass too long." Photo taped to my mailbox with a red circle around a chipped fence board. Another note about unauthorized gate modification. And I kept thinking the deed will handle this. The map will hold. I reinforced my front gate with a heavy-duty lock because I'd found shoe prints in my backyard, and Scout's hackles stood all the way up like somebody whispered a secret he didn't like. And that evening, Diane's teenage son, Tyler, leaned on his skateboard and filmed me like I was a wildlife documentary. I told him easy with the camera on my property. He smirked. Mom says, "Document violations, that gate's not HOA approved." And I said, cheerful as I could manage, "Good news, champ. I'm not in your HOA." 10 minutes later, red and blue lights washed my porch. 2 officers walked up and asked if I'd locked someone inside my property. I laughed because I thought we were still pretending to be reasonable. "No, I locked my gate." They gestured toward Tyler and Diane on the street, with that arms-crossed certainty. Some folks wear like armor. We got a 911 call alleging unlawful detainment and blocking neighborhood access. I handed over my folder, deed title county parcel map, with my lot floating just outside the HOA polygon. They studied it. Diane smiled like a stepmother in a fairy tale and said the map must be outdated. The officer handed the papers back and told her it was civil. Told me I could lock my gate, and I thought, maybe this is the end until the next morning, when a thick yellow envelope arrived with notice of non-compliance and 5 pages of fines, adding up past $1,000 for a club. I never joined. I started to dial the number on the letter, then stopped, because people like Diane feed off reactions, and I needed something heavier than outrage. I drove to the county office where Donna Beck, at the recorder's desk, pulled the official map and printed 2 certified copies, with a stamp that landed like a gavel. Lot 12B has been outside the HOA since 2001. Your boundary is 83 feet clear, she said, and that sound, that stamp, is still one of the most comforting noises I've ever heard. I got home to find Diane at my fence with 2 board members and their clipboards. "You can't ignore official correspondence," she said. "Remove the lock in the meantime. It's a safety concern." Tyler filmed like a junior news anchor, and I looked right into his lens and said, "No one gets trapped if they don't trespass." Diane gave me that rubber band smile right before it snaps. That night, a metal clink woke me. I slid the curtain, and my floodlight caught a crowbar under my latch. Diane's hands were on it. Tyler's phone threw jittery light while he filmed. I yelled and stepped outside. She dropped the bar like it burned and tried to smile. "Oh, Luke, we heard a noise and I was checking your gate with a crowbar," I said. "Please leave my property." The deputy told me next day to file a report and put up cameras, so I did. And 2 nights later, the camera caught Tyler hunched at my hinge with a screwdriver tripping and bolting. I printed stills and brought them to Sergeant Cole Ramirez, who watched without blinking, and said, "Keep documenting." The next afternoon, an official-looking sign was bolted to my fence. "Community footpath. Do not block. By order of Maple Hollow." Estates, HOA. I tore it down and felt 3 neighbors staring at me through their phones at night. Brought the HOA inspection crew with clipboards and tape measures like they were auditing a crime scene. I lit the whole yard up and said, "Step 1 foot over." "And I call the sheriff," Diane said. The board voted to include surrounding properties for uniformity, and I told her, "You can't vote your way onto a deed you don't own." They left, but not far. And the morning after that, Scout limped, and I found a thin wire snare twisted to my fence post. Not deep, but deliberate. I wrapped his paw and held him until his breathing slowed, then gave Ramirez the footage of Tyler crouched at dawn, messing with that post. We added it to the complaint. By Friday, my gate lay flat like a rib cage, and Diane stood there. Shaking, "You brought the cops on." "My son, you humiliated us," she said. I hit record and told her he trespassed and hurt my dog, and she needed to leave. She did, but Saturday. The driveway screamed, "Rule breaker," and "Move out." In orange paint that smelled like a headache, cameras showed 3 hooded figures at 2:47 a.m. One with a long blonde ponytail, one short like Tyler, and a third guy I didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered with a raven wrapped around a wrench tattoo on his neck, not a neighbor. Not any neighbor you wanted then. An email landed from Ridgeline Legal Group, telling me to take down my cameras. Restore shared access and pay pending dues attached. Was an affidavit signed by Diane with a map that nudged the HOA boundary 18 feet into my yard, like a magician palming a coin. I hired an attorney, Tessa Morgan, who said, "Classic overreach, do not respond, send me everything," and by sunset she had an injunction drafted called the sheriff and the county attorney, and even a reporter she trusted. And the porch cam caught her handing papers to Diane, whose smile cracked like ice under a heel. The neighborhood broke into Camp's notes, stuffed my mailbox, some kind. Some telling me to stop stirring things up because Diane had done a lot for them. One neat little warning that said, "You've made powerful enemies move before it gets worse." And 2 nights later, white paint screamed, "Tick-tock" across my fence, with TW carved faint under it. Like Tyler signed his homework, the same clip caught the tattooed guy turning to the camera like he wanted me to see his face. Tessa saw the still and said, "Off-the-books security outfits. Some HOAs use. Half those guys have records, should." Good news is the DA wants to look at the whole HOA now. Around midnight, Ramirez called they'd executed a warrant at the HOA office and found falsified maps and cash payments labeled Night Patrol and emails, instructing board members to document and escalate against me. He said, "Keep your lights on, we're not done." And at 3 a.m., Scout pricked his ears. I saw Tyler in the side yard, set something down and run a folded note that said, "I'm sorry. She's not herself. Please don't call the police on her. She's planning something tonight. Get out of the house." I woke Tessa, who said leave right now. She'd call Ramirez. I grabbed Scout's leash and my keys and stepped into air that felt too still, heard the soft hiss. You only recognize once in your life, smelled gasoline. Followed a dark ribbon through the grass to Diane in her driveway with that red can and the lighter rolling under her thumb. "You ruined me," she said. "You turned my people against me." I told her to put it down. She said, "Someone like you deserves to lose everything." The spark jumped, the line caught, and the fire ran. I dragged the hose until it scraped skin off my palm, blasted the flames, while a neighbor showed up with a red extinguisher, and another hauled his hose like a lifeline. The fire ate a patch of lawn and kissed my fence, but never reached the porch. Sirens grew from a rumor to a roar. Ramirez stepped out of his cruiser with that tired cop face that still says, I'm here. Tessa pulled up in a sweater and running shoes like she'd teleported the gas can. Sat in Diane's drive, and the lighter lay in a blackened puddle. My cameras stared and didn't blink, and when the dust settled, Ramirez looked at me and asked if I was okay. I nodded and told him Scout was too. He radioed the DA about charges and told a deputy to pull prints off the can. Neighbors clustered in pajamas. Diane stepped onto her porch with her hands shaking like something loose in her body. She couldn't fix, and Tyler hovered behind her, looking 10 years older than he had at dinner. I stopped at my property line and said, "Not for drama." Just because it was true. This was never about a gate. It was about control and what you thought you owned. She stared like she didn't recognize the language, and Ramirez told her to turn around. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She put her hands behind her back, and the cuffs clicked under blue light. Not loud, just final. If this were a movie, we'd cut there and roll credits. But life keeps talking when the lights come up. The DA filed arson and harassment and falsification tied to the maps. Tessa kept the record tight. I kept the cameras rolling and the files backed up. And Tyler came by later with his hood up and told me he was sorry. And I believed him. Because some kids grow up in a storm they didn't start, and they still figure out where the dry ground is. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because I documented and stayed boring when she wanted a scene, because stamped maps beat loud meetings, because a lot of people who stayed quiet finally saw enough to stop pretending. And yeah, because a teenager told the truth when it counted. Now the part where I hand you the story. Where's the line for you? When does community turn into control? Would you leave your gate open? Because a board said so. Would you let a kid film you on your own porch and call it safety? Or would you draw a boundary and hold it even when the neighborhood looks at you funny? Tell me in the comments what feels like justice here and what sits wrong in your gut. If you've lived a version of this, I want to hear it. And if you haven't, tell me where you'd tap the brakes. I'll be in the replies with Scout, listening.